So if you'd rather not have your face on the recording, you can also just send us a message in the chat, and then Marion will answer them, or at least bring them to my attention.
Yep.
So I'm sharing the screen. Okay. Then welcome everybody to the Chill Ice 3 Q&A session. Today's January 26th in 2024. It's indeed the right year this time. So we'll be presenting here from Chill Ice and the Icy Space side as the team. So we have with us today Eleanor, Charlotte, Marion, Mark, myself, Margot, and Aditi as well. So very, very briefly, let's see. Yes, we can go to the next slide. Great. About Chill Ice, I think quite a few of you have already seen some of our socials as well. So maybe Chill Ice is not the newest. So about Chill Ice, of course, location is in Iceland. That's what the I stands for. Any questions? Does anybody else know what the Chill stands for?
Something habitat under lunar lava, I think.
Yes, almost. So it's the construction of a habitat inside a lunar analog lava tube, because that's one of the key points actually of Chill Ice, is that we're going to do this whole mission inside a lava tube. So for this, the mission preparation will be mostly online, but of course the mission itself will be in Iceland. The days of the mission itself, the training starts on April 20th. The crew will arrive in Iceland on the 6th of August, and the mission will actually start on the 13th of August and end on the 26th, so 14 days of simulation. And then in the end, we will also have 2 or 3 days of wrap-up, where there will also be some media appearances, just so that everybody knows who is applying, that you will also have to be available, of course, from the 6th until the 28th, basically, in August. In Iceland. And then the total crew, it will consist of 4 crew members and 4 selected backups as well, which will come with us on site in Iceland to help out on the MCC side. So a little bit more about us. Who are we presenting here today? So first of all, we have Marion Duguay. She's also the one who is responding to you in the chats and admitting everybody who is joining us still. She's the mission coordinator, and she has also been the mission coordinator for Chill Ice 2. So she has a lot of this experience, just making sure that all of the mission actually goes as smoothly as we're planning. Then we have Margot Isartin as well from France, and she is our head of research. And I think a few of you also have already submitted some of the research applications. We've seen a lot of them coming in already. That's great. So she will make sure that we have the proper world top research and that you guys will be doing as soon as you're selected and join us inside the lava tube in Iceland. Then myself, I'm one of the co-founders of Icy Space together with Charlotte Powells, and I'm also the Chill Ice founder. Then we have Aditi Sate, originally from India, but also from Germany, and she's the head of logistics, and she'll make sure that everything is in Iceland at the time that it needs to be in Iceland. And then lastly, Eleanor Poli has also joined us today, and she is the head of astronauts for Chill Ice 3, so you will be mostly having contact with her in the future. Then a little bit of a background. So I already mentioned Icy Space, and maybe your question is, what is Icy Space, or who is Icy Space? So Icy Space is, well, it's of course an acronym. In space, we love acronyms. So it stands for the Isolated Confined Extreme Environments. And we're using these kinds of environments as a test bed for future off-Earth survival for humans. And we are currently being incubated at the ESA Business Incubation Center in Prague. And you may know us from some of the other missions as well, of course, the Chill Ice campaigns, but also the APSIS campaign last year in Spain. And now that we're coming up with Chill Ice 3 in August 2024. But then, of course, so I've said already a few times, we're doing analog missions. But then the question is, why would you even do analog missions? And that would be a question for you as well. So dear audience, please feel free to speak up. Why are there analog missions? Why are they necessary? And why should we do them? If you don't want to speak up, you can also just type in the chat.
So maybe I can start, or anyone else?
Of course.
So for me, I see it as an amazing test bed that's, I would say, from a resource perspective, not only from a money perspective, cheaper, safer, and easier to use for experiments that might go on to a very more inhospitable and less or less forgiving environment. So if you want to simulate something on Moon or Mars, it's easier to start and see what happens as little quirks to iron them out on Earth than to do it on space. And the other thing is it allows other companies to try out things that might benefit them while not necessarily having a space advantage.
Yeah, exactly. That's already quite a few of the keywords that we have. Do we also have some answers in the chat? I do see a few messages pop up, or maybe that's just new people who want to join. Well, then I think we just have to do with this perfect summary, basically from Alias, I would say. So why, of course, the analog missions? Well, first of course, the teamwork, the team dynamics. We're literally training for off-Earth missions for both humans and for instruments, of course. And it's sort of the ultimate way to test and prepare for these space missions. The science of what we can and should investigate when we're going to the moon, or even beyond the moon. Of course, it's also the challenge, I would say. That's one of the sort of key parts that we have as humans, to also want this challenge. But more importantly, it's about the validation, making sure that what we're going to do up there makes sense, that it's necessary, and that we can actually have at least an idea of what we want to experience with on the lunar or the Martian surface. And as I said, the inspiration, doing a feasibility testing. And then specifically, why a chill ice analog mission? So I already gave a few hints in some of my earlier ramblings about what happened when we started chill ice. But I think this might be nice to ask as well to the group, why specifically the chill ice analog missions? Yes, Guido?
So from my understanding, both on the moon, but also potentially on Mars, lava tubes present themselves as a pretty good candidate for astronaut habitation, because you basically get free radiation shielding without having to construct a regolith shielding around a habitat on the surface. So, but there's obviously also potential challenges with living in a lava tube, like the terrain and how you do EVAs from that. So there's it's a interesting candidate for habitation, but there's lots of stuff to test around it. So hence the analog missions.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Guido. Thank you so much. And I also saw some messages in the chat, I think, popping up. And of course, first of all, yes, the EVA opportunities, because it's a subsurface mission, just being there. But it's also, of course, the habitat. So not just the habitat as in the whole lava tube, but also the habitat itself that we're developing right now as an inflatable structure. Then the lava tubes themselves, it has already been mentioned as well. Of course, these lava tubes, we also have lava tubes on the moon. We also have lava tubes on Mars. And if you're just looking at the both geochemistry, actually, the lava tubes on Iceland are very, very comparable to what we have on the moon and the Martian surface. Then also the robotics that we're working with, we're going to have a lot of very cool robotics. So yes, it's going to be an awesome mission yet again. And also just being part of paving the way to deeper space exploration. As you mentioned, for longer duration stays on the lunar surface, you will need to have some sort of additional protection, and lava tubes might just be one of the best ways to go. Subsurface, also for the isolation, then of course top-notch research that we're doing, while still keeping it relatively personal, because we're not that big of a group. We are a relatively small group, but at the same time, we're doing all this weird interdisciplinary research, and literally at the top of the world. We have the experience being the first fully subsurface analog inside a lava tube, from our team, and of course volcanoes. Who doesn't love volcanoes? At least maybe some of the Icelanders don't as much at this point, but volcanoes are very cool, and we will definitely also visit some volcanoes, and just the extreme environments that the Icelandic lunar surface offers to us as an analog mission, but also to you as a candidate. I would say it's the closest to the actual lunar scenario. So speaking of the scenario, what is actually going to happen during GeoICE 3. So if you are familiar with us, then you know that we always try to have some sort of a bigger scenario around the mission to make sure that it fits within certain confinements that we can set from the beginning. So as it says over here, it's going to be 14 days of darkness. So overall, the scenario that we're working with right now is basically there is a lunar station on the surface and something goes wrong with the heating. So just to make sure that you survive the lunar night without freezing to death, because as you might know, it can go down to about minus 200 degrees Celsius in the lunar night. We have to escape in the safety of these lava tubes. And there is already a small research station built inside the lava tubes, but how can we survive there with a crew of 4 people? That's going to be the challenge, and that's also why it's going to be 14 days of darkness. And we'll make sure that even when you are approaching one of the skylights, that it will still be relatively dark in Iceland. So it's going to be a proper 14 days of darkness. There will not be any sunlight. There will not be any fresh food. There will not be any fresh water. Everything will have to be inside the simulation. So it's going to be a very tough, but also I would say a very fun experience. And of course, we do have the proper training for it as well. First of all, the team dynamics, just making sure that everybody is able to get along even when you're stuck with each other for 14 days in such a small environment. And then also, of course, the very specific experiments training. As mentioned a few times already, we will have a lot of experiments from a lot of different countries and research groups. So there will be a very intense part of the training will also be focused mostly on the experiments. Then, of course, also the communication. How do we properly communicate over radio, but also what kind of protocols do we adhere to, just to make sure that in case of an emergency scenario, we know exactly where you are and what's happening. And geological training, of course, the Icelandic lava tubes are a protected environment. So also make sure that everybody knows what kind of environment we're actually dealing with before we're locking you guys up inside this lava tube. Then the habitat and the spacesuit training, of course, also very important, mostly from the engineering side, but also just to keep you safe. Of course, on Earth, the lava tubes are relatively safe. We know them quite well, and everybody can just go in and out in a certain degree. But at the same time, it's still an extreme environment, just making sure that you can handle the environment and also handle the stress well. These kinds of trainings will all be covered within the 2 months, mostly online before the mission, and then also the about 8 days of pre-mission training on site in Iceland. And I think that comes to one of the most important questions for why most of you are here, I would say. So the astronaut recruitment, of course, what kind of candidates are we looking for? Well, first of all, we are looking for team players. As I said, it's going to be a very tight environment. It's going to be 4 people locked in there, or 3 people with you. And that's just going to cause, at some point, some friction. And we just need to make sure that as soon as this friction happens, that we know how to deal with it, but that also you know what your friction points are so that we can have open communication on them. Of course, a high interest in space and space exploration. I think all of us who are here, at least working from the GeoICE side, are super passionate about space and are basically dedicating their lives to at least being part of this whole space exploration part and getting humans off Earth in a safe and efficient manner. Then, of course, a STEM background is a plus, but it's not a hard requirement. And same with previous experience in expeditions or analog space missions. It is a plus, but it's not a hard requirement. Of course, if you know that you are capable of surviving inside a cave for a few weeks without any problems, that will definitely be a very big benefit. And I think that the next word is sort of an overall keyword, to be resilient, because it will be a stressful environment, because it will be a very closely confined environment. You will have some friction at some point. You will have a lack of comfort. You will have a lack of sleep, and you will have an overload of work. And of course, we as an MCC try to mitigate this as much as possible, but it's going to be tough. I can tell you that. So we need people who are resilient, and of course, also a good level of spoken English. English is the main language of communication within the GeoICE team. So we also need to have this open level of communication and at least a good level of spoken English. Loves challenges. As I said, it's going to be a big challenge. So if you are up for basically a month-long challenge, then definitely this is one of the good places for you. And interdisciplinary work. Also, as mentioned, we will have a lot of different types of research from a lot of different fields and disciplines. So it will be a plus if you have at least some experience working, for example, if you are an engineer, to also have worked with scientists or with social studies people or with psychology, maybe even something in the medical fields. All these kinds of things would, of course, be a big plus. And then the selection process, which I think we might also get a few more questions about in a bit. So we basically have this 4-stage selection process. First of all, we will mostly look at your CV or your resume and the motivation letter that you will have to write and hand in the application form. That's mostly to get a sense of your hard skills, as we call them, just making sure that the background that you have fits within the profile of backgrounds that we're looking for. Secondly, we'll have the interview panel, and then you will have a personal interview with a few of us, where we'll mostly be looking at your resilience, about your personality as well, and just sort of teasing you to see how you would react to certain scenarios. Then we'll have a team exercise, and this is mostly to look at the teamwork, about the team playership, as we already called it, and also to some degree, of course, the leadership, but mostly to see how you are working with others in a team, especially others that you may not know that well beforehand. And then in the end, we'll have the final selections, for which we have a very cool selection panel as well, including an astronaut. So by the time that you will be chosen by the Chill Ice 3 crew to be a part of them, you will actually have been chosen personally by an astronaut as well. And we're looking for the overall fit, for the motivation, but also for the team composition. So this might mean that even though you are one of the best people that come actually out in the first 3 rounds, if you have mostly the qualities of a very strong leader, and we also have another very strong leader, we eventually have to select just one strong leader in that sense to reduce this amount of friction. So even though you might be a right fit, looking at the team composition in the end might not be the fit for this mission, but then of course we'll also keep you in mind for future missions, because we're definitely not done with all of the missions. Then the selection process in a timeline. So we opened the call for astronauts on the 15th of January, and basically from the 15th of February, we'll start to round it up and actually do this whole first round of CVs, letters. And then the second round with the interviews will be until the end of February, and then we'll have the team exercises until the second week of March, and the final round with the whole astronauts panel selection will happen until the end of March. Then the candidates selected for the crew will be notified around that time as well, around the end of March, and we'll start with the initial training orientation on the 20th of April. And you can also see here in the timeline the rest of the astronaut training, which will span well, at least over 2 months, as seen over here, and then also with the in-person training and the mission in August happening very, very soon already. I think it's exactly 200 days from today onwards, so I think that's going to be very exciting. Then, of course, if you see this and you're thinking, maybe I want it, maybe I don't want to apply, but I still want to be involved, then of course there are also other ways to get involved within the CHOAS-3 mission. So first of all, of course, our call for research is still open. So if you have a research topic, even if you also want to apply as an astronaut, you can also apply still as a researcher. As I said, we have a lot of very cool research, but we are always looking for more research. I think every single one in the team of IC Space and CHOAS-3 is very, very keen on dedicating their lives just to get closer to actually being this part of space exploration. And all of us just want to do more and more, maybe even to the point that we maybe shouldn't, but of course it's very cool. So please just apply to a research call if you have a topic of research, a topic of interest, and maybe also a professor or somebody at a university, research institute, an agency, a company, whatever. Basically, if you want to do research with us, we are very open to it. And then lastly, of course, we're also always looking for sponsors, just to make sure that this whole mission can go on, and also future campaigns are allowed to go on to the quantity and the quality, especially that we are used to in these past few campaigns. And I think with that, it's the end of our side of the presentation, which I think comes to the real part of why we are here today, which is, of course, the Q&A. So if you have any questions, we are here with a very big team to answer all of your questions. And then I think I will also have to hand it over to Marion, who might know the other things.
I think there are 2 questions. Thank you, Mark, so much for this presentation. Maybe let's first go with Elias Mulkey. I think you were the first one to raise your hand.
No worries, thank you. So I have 2 questions. The first one concerns the CV we hand in. So what are the must topics? Like, for example, do you need nationality or not? And what are the nice to have topics that should be put on the CV? And my second question concerns the interviews and team exercises. Will they be remote or on-site? And if on-site, what weekdays would it be? Since I'm working full-time, so, I mean, should I be considered? Obviously, I'm working full-time, so question is, yeah, concerning holidays, etc. Thank you.
I think those are both great questions, Elias. So as an answer to your first question, I think one of the most important parts, of course, of any CV is just to list any relevant experience that you have, and also that you think might be relevant. I think that that's also one of the things that we're looking for, of course, to see what you think is relevant for these kinds of missions. And overall, of course, just your educational background, your experience working. You say you're working full-time, definitely also list that, of course, because if you're working, for example, in an extreme environment, if you're working in a lab environment, if you're working with a lot of people, if you're in a leadership position, all those kinds of things are going to be important for the selection process. And then secondly, for the interviews and for the team exercises, all of this will be online, also because I'm not sure about right here, but in previous missions, we've had applicants from over, I think, 60 different countries. So in the end, it's very hard, especially in this first round, to make sure that everybody can gather on site. We are still looking into having some on-site training in Europe before the mission starts. And otherwise, it will mostly be online, and then only the on-site trainings in Iceland will happen just before the mission. I hope that answers your questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark.
No problem.
Perfect. Now, next hand raised is Gidon.
Hiya. Thank you for all of that info. So, like Elias, I had 2 questions as well. The first one was recognizing that there's still proposals coming in, but based on the research proposals you've seen so far and you're planning for the mission, are you able to say what the 4 roles that you're recruiting for are? And maybe if there's any variation in the skills required for each one? And then second question is, super exciting to hear about the scenario. Is that going to place sort of conditions and limits on the amount of information that will be available in training before the scenario starts, based on the fact that it's kind of simulating an emergency scenario that would, I guess, be unexpected on the part of the astronauts?
Okay, again, two very good questions. So wait, sorry. The first question, could you repeat?
Yeah, what are the 4 roles that you're recruiting for?
So I think that's always going to be the hard part, especially if you're trying to move parts of humanity off Earth. Then you actually want to have representatives of of all of humanity in that sense. But most importantly, we are looking for at least one person which has an engineering or an electrical engineering background, just to make sure that all of the devices that we'll have inside the habitat are being operated correctly and also are being kept up to date, especially in the environment that we're in, as in the lava tubes in Iceland. Then secondly, we will also have somebody with an interdisciplinary science background, whether that's, for example, geology, from physics, from a chemistry standpoint, from mathematics, just to make sure that we have somebody in charge of the research inside the habitat as well, who can basically scope out into all of these different fields, and can take the charge in basically being the chief scientist on the mission. And then we need at least one person with a medical, not per se a medical degree, but at least experience in the field with medical environments or a paramedic scenario, where you can also, of course, apply first aid, may it be necessary, to your fellow crewmates. And then fourthly, we also need somebody who has a very strong leadership position, experience, and also communication skills, which will likely be the commander, but it might also, of course, interchange within these roles. And then we would prefer also a secondary scientist and a secondary engineer, and also a secondary medical person. So again, we are looking for about the skill sets of, I would say, 15 people within the 4 people that we can actually send into the lava tube. So we will need this interdisciplinarity and just this sort of openness and the eagerness to learn all these different fields within the very, very short time span that we have. So yes, we need at least these 4 backgrounds. If you can combine them, that would be perfect. But if you don't have necessarily one of these strict profiles, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're automatically straight away from the mission, because we also, of course, need to have the backups. We also need to have this personnel for MCC. And as I already mentioned, we have a lot more missions coming up as well, not just here in Iceland. So even if you might not make it through the actual candidates this round, future missions might have larger crew compositions as well, where your skill set might be the ultimate fit that we're looking for.
Just also to add slightly on that, if you are an artist or somebody who has like a social background or like business or economics, you're also more than welcome to apply, especially if you have a lot of experience in extreme environments or like in this interdisciplinary field. So yes, what Mark just mentioned, the scientists, the engineers, the medics are of critical positions that we're looking for. But as mentioned, we have a 4th person, so that means that we are kind of flexible as well to also open to different fields, especially when you're going to be locked up for 2 weeks with each other. Having also a person who thinks creatively outside of the box and is able as well to entertain and keep the crew together is, from a psychology point of view and from our psychologists, a very important aspect that we're looking into.
Super helpful, thank you.
And I think you also had a second question. If you could repeat.
Yeah, I guess the second question, I guess what it gets to is, given that this is simulating an emergency scenario with the failure of the thermal system, how much of what will happen during the 2 weeks will be known ahead of time versus, I guess, how much of the mission is dealing with unexpected scenarios?
So, of course, the overall mission scenario will be known to you as the crew as well, just to make sure that all of specifically the safety features are also, of course, being handled properly. And that's always going to be our first priority. So we will not tell you or refrain from telling you anything that might be either dangerous or lethal or in any way can cause some form of harm, whether that's bodily or mental, to you as the astronauts, of course. But there will also be some unexpected scenarios. It will also be part of the research that we will have some sort of either in-sim emergency scenario, or that will purposely break a solar panel or something, and that you will have to do an EVA to make sure that everything is restored. And of course, that's also the whole part of these kinds of tests, of these kinds of analog missions, is to make sure that we have this readiness on multiple levels, to make sure that we have this there it is again, the resilience as humanity as a whole or as a team to any kinds of emergency scenarios. So of course the crew will be updated on the actual scenario, the location and everything where you are going, but there will also be some points indeed left out.
Cool. Very exciting. Thank you.
So some
Nice.
questions we have in the chat. Valerie asks if you can explain a bit more, Mark, on the online trainings happening pre-mission, and specifically how it can fit around a full-time working schedule.
So that is mostly also going to be dependent, of course, on the candidates and their locations, because we will have to be flexible in that. There is probably going to be multiple people from multiple countries, which also means that at some point we will have to have this discussion also on what times work best for everyone. So most of our meetings from the CHOI side are already planned around a full-time working day. So it's mostly in the evenings or the afternoons, and sometimes also in the weekends. So this will also be a part of this pre-mission online training. And as possible, or where possible, we would also, of course, try to record as many of these sessions as possible, just to make sure that in case anybody of the crew candidates or the backup crew does miss one of these sessions, that we can still have this information ready for you, that you can look at it in your own time. But of course, we try to schedule with you as much as we can around the schedules that are rigidized for your sites.
Okay, perfect. So questions I have answered on the chat, but I think it's good also to have a bit of an audio note on this. There's been a question on whether students are welcomed or not, and absolutely. As Mark said, we're not looking into the educational stage, but more on the experience, specifically experience in extreme environments. So if you are still a student, you can absolutely consider applying. There's been some questions on the fee for applying. It will be roughly 3,000 euros as a crew member, but do note that IC Space is here to support, to find sponsorship also. So it's not a amount you have to find by yourself in any way. Also, the costs include the simulation, the trainings, the food, the local transportation, everything is covered when you're on site through this fee. What else? There's been a question on health restrictions. If there's any specific health restrictions that need to be highlighted. For this, it's just better to be open about everything you have in terms of health, because some will be disqualifiers, others will not. So this is something we will assess internally.
Just in addition to that, we have medical doctors who will also be part of the review process. So we will discuss with them. And also to be part of Chilled Ice, you need to check as well with your doctor that everything is okay and like that you are a green light for such an expedition.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now going on to the people who raised their hands. I think, Elias, you were first. Oh,
Yes. No.
Hand down. Okay, that's fine. Vanchika, do you want to go?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to dismute myself. Sorry.
Oh, that happened.
Apologies. So just was wondering concerning, again, follow up on the medical thing. So for instance, nearsightedness is considered a medical thing and I'm supposed to hand it in, right?
It's yes. Any medical thing, yes. Nearsightedness would not be an issue though. Just so you know, but it's something that is always good to report.
Okay, thank you.
If you have allergies, especially like food restrictions, it's very important for us to know as well, because you will be given dry-freeze meals. So we can adjust the diet based on your preferences, but we also need to make sure that you keep up on your calorie counts, for example. And if you're sensitive to light, you will not have much of a problem because you're in a lavatube and in the dark. But if you have vitamin D, for example, that you're lacking vitamin D, then you need to take additional supplements, for example. If you, for example, have broken your leg, then you will be fortunately disqualified. And then we have to set up a backup analog astronaut to take over your place. So I highly recommend to not go skiing or snowboarding in June, July, or like any major extreme sports to do like around the time. Just a heads up.
Yeah. And Eleanor highlighted also a very good point. If you do have medication, please let us know also.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Eleanor, for your answers.
Perfect. What other question did I see? Oh yeah, so Vanshika, I think you had a question also.
Yeah. Hi, ma'am. My question to you is, what does success in this role look like?
What is a successful crew member, or how to successfully go through the selection? I guess so. Both things go hand in hand. So as Mark said,
Like after the completion of the mission, how will it help us into getting in any space sector?
okay. Yeah. Do you want to go for it, Mark, or should I answer?
Yeah, sure. So of course, first of all, because we have such an interdisciplinary and international team, we have a vast network even from our personal side of things already. So working just with these kinds of people will also allow you to come close to a lot of top-notch researchers worldwide. And I think especially if you're either in academia or wanting to have a career in academia, we've had quite a few publications already. We've had conference abstracts and proceedings from conferences as well, where we have published our work. And I think if you are looking for specifically the academic path, this is also, of course, going to be a crucial step into furthering your career. And other than that, just because you have done such a mission in such an extreme environment, that's also, of course, a very good experience to have, because you can prove your resilience. You can prove that you have worked under enormous amounts of stress for 2 weeks straight with a very international team, with very interdisciplinary and very intercultural people as well. So these kinds of skills will also, at least in my opinion, only be beneficial for any future endeavor basically that you will be doing.
Thank you, Mark.
Perfect. Mark, do you want to touch upon the research that we're planning to do, and also maybe giving an example during Chalice 2 what happened, so that the applicants can know what to expect?
Yeah, of course. So unfortunately, not all of the research has been selected yet. The call for research is still ongoing, so we have another 3 days to hand in research proposals that do require an ethical review approval as well. We have just over a month to also hand in research proposals that do not require such an ethical approval. So there is still a lot of research being discussed, and unfortunately we cannot really give too much information on that side. But to give an insight into what we did in previous missions, we usually have around 10 to 15 sort of larger research topics or research projects, which will be the main focus of the day, and a number of other sort of smaller research projects as well, which will, for example, be surveys and questionnaires that you have to fill in every night before you go to bed or every morning if you wake up, which will be the less time consuming, at least per day, but in the end, of course, over all of the whole mission, they might still take up quite a bit of your time. So yeah, in previous missions, we had a lot of focus as well on robotics, and this will continue as well during TOIS 3, where we will use rover and robotic platforms as a means to aid human exploration. So lava tubes are relatively dangerous terrain. I mean, of course, it's subsurface, it's a cave, the rocks are very sharp, there will be loose rubble as well, and it's going to be pitch black, which means that if possible, we also would like to try a little bit more in the robotic exploration part. So for example, you will be working with robots or rovers to explore at least parts of the cave before going there as a human, but also in collaboration with humans. So not just autonomous rovers or robotics, but also where humans actually have to be outside of the habitat wearing their simulation spacesuits, to work with these kinds of devices and these instruments. Then we haven't selected something like this yet, but we are usually also working with some specific environmental instruments like LiDAR, like XRF, like XRD, like Raman spectroscopy, just to make sure that what we can do on the environment here in Iceland or there in Iceland can also be used on the actual lunar surface. And that also comes again back to the geochemistry of these Icelandic lavatubes and their similarity to the actual lunar and Martian ones. So basically instrumentation testing. And yeah, then of course, a lot of new things are being developed as well for these missions. So we will have a brand new habitat. For those of you who are familiar with our previous habitats, it will be slightly bigger, it will be slightly different. I'm not sure if I am allowed to give too much information. I'm looking at Charlotte, but it will be a new habitat as well. So of course, also just the validation basically of this habitat for these kinds of extreme environments will also be a part of the research. So it's a learning experience for all of us. And in general, if there's anything that we as an MCC or we as the mission team are, in your eyes or your opinion, not supposed to be doing, also please let us know, and we can always see how we can continuously improve together. I hope that answers your question.
That's a perfect review, Mark. Thank you. Could you describe the base inside the lava tube?
The base inside the lava tube. And then I guess you're not talking about the flooring of the lava tube itself, which is filled with all kinds of beautiful rias and some pahoihoi flows as well. I think you're talking specifically about the habitat, for which I will have to give the question to Charlotte. Because I'm not working on the habitat. I'm mostly working on the rocks, but I can tell you all about the rocks. So please give me more questions about rocks as well.
Yeah, so about the habitat, it's an inflatable habitat. Like Mark said, we cannot unfortunately tell too much until we have the official release on our socials and website. But it's going to be very exciting. It has a lot of improvements compared to the Echo 1, which was our first habitat. Like I said, it is an inflatable, which means that it's standalone and like has to be set up by the crew itself. Like there are different parameters that we're looking into based on the feasibility. We're going to do a full deployment test of the habitat in May with the MCC team. And if the Analogue astronauts that are selected are near the Netherlands, then they're also invited to already join and like have already some insight. Otherwise, you will get all the on-site trainings, learning about all the systems online and then on-site in Iceland as well. That's why it's so important for you to be there on the 6th of August, because you will have 5 days of on-site training. And you really need to learn all the procedures, all the systems that you also already learned online.
Yeah, and also the habitat will be continuously monitored by the Mission Control Center, which is around 40 minutes away by car. So this also links back to the medical emergencies and the conversation that has been going on in the chat. If anything happens, there are first responders really close to where the crew will be stationed. We have also the Icelandic emergency team, which is on hold for us. And we have the MCC as a third responder. Okay, perfect. I think this is it in terms of questions for now. Maybe Mark, can you just briefly summarize what we're looking for again in candidates as a final wrap up?
So I think I'll just get this slide on show as well again. So again, what we're looking for first and foremost is the team player, and basically the social skills, the social ease in which you can cope with difficult people. Not necessarily that we, of course, select difficult people, But I can tell you, if you are stuck for 2 weeks in a very close environment, even the nicest people can turn into some a little bit more difficult people at some point. So just making sure that we are having the right team players in that sense, that everybody can go into the mission having fun, and of course also come out of the mission while still having fun and being happy. Then the passion for space and space exploration. It's going to be a tough challenge. It's going to be a tough 2 weeks. And I think you can only make it through if you really have this passion for space and want to go into the next phase, literally with your career, but also with your experience. STEM background is a plus, but it's not a hard requirement. Same goes for previous experience in expeditions or analog space missions. Interdisciplinary work environment is also a plus, but mostly what we're looking for is sort of a resilience. And of course, this can be proved through these kinds of previous experiences, but it can also just be from you working with a lot of different people in a lot of different cultures, in a lot of different teams, or a lot of stressful environments, and not necessarily research expeditions going to the top of Mount Everest or something like that. A good level of spoken English is indeed a must. And of course, we need to be able to communicate clearly with you, just in case that there's an emergency, that we are on the same level of communication, that we can clearly understand each other. And I think loving challenges is definitely also a very important part, making sure that everybody indeed, as I said, is having fun both going in and out of the mission. And I will also keep this slide open. If you just want to be involved in any other way, you can also apply to a research call. I think this QR code will point you towards the Chill Ice 3 page on the Icy Space website. There's a lot of information, and you will also be able to apply directly to become a part of our Analogue astronaut crew.
Okay. Then just some special tips that can help to your advantage. If you already have done an Analogue astronaut mission, this is again a very big plus. It really depends on the facility though, like on the Analogue mission that you've done. But if you have done Asclepius or Lunaris or High Seas, like those kind of missions, then that is definitely a plus to take into consideration. Also, highlight any media experience that you have. So any experience with media, with outreach, also with academia, with like supporting with conferences, if you have attended the conferences or presented at a conference or have done public speaking before, make sure that you also highlight that in your resume. I know it's a lot that we ask, but it helps to get you a higher rating score during the application process. And also it gives us a better insight when we do the interview of your personalities and what kind of experience you have.
Very good tips, Charlotte. Yeah. And so if anyone has any other questions, you can contact us with our email. And also there is a second Q&A, which is the 1st of February at 5 p.m. CET. So you can also register for that if you want to chat with us on this topic. Perfect. And yeah, as Eleanor says, basically, just as if you're applying for the European Space Agency, also to, again, emphasize, we're asking for the CV, which is mostly your experience, and then the letter of motivation, which is the why would you be interested in doing this? Why do you think you're a good fit? And it's quite important to differentiate between the two. And if you have any questions on the actual form, just let us know. And thank you so much, Mark, for presenting.
No problem.
I think
thank you all very much for attending.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And this is the end of our Q&A. So have a great end of the week and a great weekend. Ciao, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
so much. Good luck.
Bye.
Hope to see you soon.
I think we can stop the recording.
Yeah.
Perfect.
How do we manage recordings?
Yeah. Thank you for joining, Madrine.